Hi, everyone. Piper Harris here, and welcome to this Monday, the 30th, for the Caring Through COVID video series. So I have to be honest, this weekend I had to take a break from some social media. I had a great time. I was crafty. I redid my 30-plus-year-old hope chest and did some sewing, things haven't done because I've been so busy. So this weekend I did take a break, and I had to take a break from social media especially, and I don't know about you, but on group pages like Facebook for the neighborhood or whatever it is, there's so much fighting, so much defensiveness, people just ranting at each other. And it was something that I had to step away from. And so I want to ask you, I'm sure I'm not alone in the fact that you've seen defensiveness on the rise, especially with this COVID pandemic. We're seeing infighting with our political leaders. We're seeing it even within our health communities. We're seeing it with people that are choosing to stay home and people who are choosing not to. No one enjoys taking criticism. No one does. However, the most dangerous trait that you can have, not only for yourself, but as a leader, is defensiveness. So this week, I'm going to be talking about how you can get stuck in identity mind traps, meaning we tend to believe that we've changed a ton until right now, but we won't change as much in the years to come. So that means that we assume that our identity is settled, and we avoid looking inward. And so many times we get in these mind traps, which exhibit themselves in defensiveness. When we get stuck in these areas, we tend to draw a line between growing and evolving as a person. And instinctively, this hides self-awareness. So that means we're thinking, I know it all. I know what it takes. This is good. This is bad. This is right. You were wrong. So this jumps in many times in our lives as the defensiveness. So before we continue on, let me ask you, do you struggle with criticism, whether it's directly against something you've said or you've done, or just simply your beliefs? Do you instinctively argue that you're right? You all know these people, right? They just right in there. They're right. They're going to argue no matter what, just for argument's sake. Let me ask you, do you deny your mistakes or your faults? Do you rationalize your failures or your choices right off the bat? Do you get upset when you receive bad news, which is probably counter to some stories that you're telling yourself or the beliefs that you're telling yourself? Do you flat out ignore others? Or do you shut down at negative feedback? So before we go any further, I'm willing to bet you're thinking about someone else in your life that's exhibiting these sort of behaviors. Stop yourself right there. With the defensive mind, the identity mind traps come into play, right? And what happens with that, with these mind identity traps, is that your ego is stepping in, which is probably why you're thinking of somebody else right now. So rather than think about someone else, I really want you to put yourself in your shoes and focus on you. So let's jump into the 4 traps that we can fall into that can exhibit itself through defensiveness. Number 1, simple stories. We have a great desire for simple stories, meaning I have all the answers, but unfortunately that blinds us to the real ones. However, storytelling, simple stories, is really built into our DNA. We've been telling stories for millennia. This many times is a defense mechanism. If we know who the villain is and who the hero is, well, that's easy. We know what's going to happen next. This is great, but our stories are far more complex and they involve far more players than heroes and villains. So simple stories that you're telling yourself routinely lead to unhappy endings or defensiveness. Number 2, the next trap that you could be falling into is the rightness trap. That's the feeling of certainty. And it's funny, scientists have actually found that rightness, that feeling of rightness, is a deep emotional state. But the thing we know about emotional states is a lot of times rightness is not going to be right. Number 3 is agreement. We all crave agreement and we hate conflict. So that means that we are going to value the options and the opinions of those that agree with our own. Confirmation bias, right? So we find those things, those places, those groups that agree with us. And conversely, we decide anyone outside of those are completely invalid. So that's where we're seeing defensiveness, like on the Facebook post on my neighborhood page. Number four, and this is a big one, control. Control is connected to our happiness. And obviously, all of us are feeling completely out of control right now. Control gives us the outcome that we desire when things are unpredictable. So the compulsion to control things can come out in a defensive manner, right? We're trying to control things. We're defensive. We're going to argue our point. So going back to those questions that I asked you, do you struggle with criticism, whether it's directly against something you've done or said, or if it's a deeply held belief? Do you instinctively argue that you're right without just listening first? Do you deny your mistakes or faults? Do you rationalize your failures or choices? Do you get upset when you receive bad news that's counter to those stories that you're telling yourself? Do you flat out ignore individuals because they don't agree with you? Or do you shut down negative feedback or even in between feedback? This is your defensive mind. And this defensive mind is stuck in these identity mind traps, those 4 traps of simple stories, rightness, agreement, and control. Your defensive mind is more than likely stuck in one of these areas. And you can see how being stuck in one of these areas and being defensive can be harmful to yourself and to others, and especially if you're leading an organization. While we can never truly escape these mind traps, it's best to start asking questions regarding your reactions and create mindfulness around it. We're going to continue talking about our mind, especially in the midst of this pandemic and the different levels of development of the mind. This hopefully is going to help you be more mindful and start asking those questions, as well as help you be a bit more empathetic to other individuals in your life. This week on our Lunch and Learn series on Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I have my special guest, Christiana George, joining me. And we're going to be speaking on self-compassion, mindfulness, not only for the individual, but how do we bring in that into an organization? So I've really enjoyed speaking with you today about your mind and maybe your defensiveness. I can't wait to continue this discussion with you tomorrow. I hope this finds you doing well. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm Piper Harris, Poema Women's Success Coaching.